Hi Kriegsspielers, it's Umpire LaFondios. We're going to do an after-action review for the recent scenario Stonne 1940 in the World War II Division Commander series. In it, the French squared off against the Germans at the village of Stonne, which was called the Verdun of 1940. For background, we're going to use a reference from the book Case Red by Bob Forsyk. Forsyk looks at the France 1940 campaign in a new light, and he questions a lot of the assumptions that we commonly hold, and so I'll use that as some background for the scenario to give us some color commentary. But the historical popular summary that was shared after the fall of France was that there was a massive German offensive that bypassed the Maginot Line, that blitzkrieg tactics work, and by extension the French did not understand blitzkrieg, nor could they respond to it. Then Dunkirk happened, then the French gave up. So that's the common narrative of the France 1940. And in Case Red, Forsyk challenges this narrative, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through the after-action review. The French plan of 1940 was actually sound. They used the Maginot Line in the east to keep the close border more defended, and they actually had planned for their elite units, or their more trained units, to head into Belgium on the beginning of hostilities. And actually, if you look at the purple line, that's the plan. That's where they were going to hold, and that's really actually what happened. You'll also notice on this slide that the 3rd Armored Division is circled here, and the 3rd Armored Division plays a role in in our scenario. So there's this mythology about this plan that there's a massive German offensive that bypassed the Maginot Line completely. But busting that myth is the Maginot Line actually worked as it was designed. The Germans didn't attack there, and when they did attack there, it took a very long time for them to reduce those forts. So the Maginot Line actually did what it was expected to do. Turns out it just wasn't long enough. So everyone who badmouths the Maginot Line actually isn't looking at the situation clearly. Okay, if we look at operations through 16 May, you see here that the red line showing the French have actually stopped the Germans. They have their A-level formations, have stopped the Germans in Belgium with help of the British, and the Maginot Line has not been penetrated. However, the Germans have gone through the Ardennes, and they've focused on 2 reserve divisions, the 9th and the 7th, and those divisions have collapsed. So those were sea-level formations, never really designed to hold back the main weight of the German army. And so there's a salient in the middle of the line, and this the French have to react to. So this idea that the Germans have blitzkrieg tactics and the French don't have good tactics actually is not true, because the French units in Belgium actually stopped the Germans. So when their first line units were put into play, they actually worked. Here's our scenario, and the myth then is that once the Ardennes was penetrated, the French gave up, Dunkirk happened, and that was the end of the campaign, which of course is not true. The French counterattacked absolutely aggressively in several places, trying to stem the breakthrough, and they attacked in places like Stonne, which is our scenario. So, and even according to Case Red, operations continued after Dunkirk, and there was actually a second BEF, British Expeditionary Force, that was sent to France, and they decamped just like the first one. So, way after Dunkirk, there was still activity going on. Discerning Kriegsspiel players will notice that it was actually the 2nd Army under Hunziker who commanded the Stonne operation, not the 1st. So that was an umpire error. Throw the yellow flag, first down for all players. So the battle area, the Germans are coming in from the north of Stonne and the French coming from the south. The French again are trying to cut that line and begin to roll up that flank so that they can make that penetration through the Ardennes actually a salient and try to close it. So this was a French attack. The terrain, if you look at it, everywhere in purple is good for infantry, and everywhere in red, the red arrows, is good for armor. So the stars show the objective points, but clearly there's going to be an armored thrust through La Bassas, through Stonne, and on down. So the terrain sets that up. Here was the setup on both sides. The French moved quickly to secure Stonne and then the woods north of Stonne. They also sent the 5th Armor to the west. Let's go ahead now and listen to the French plan in the words of the French commander. These words are text-to-speech using a little AI program, so it's not the actual French commander, but it is the words of the French commander. So here's the French plan.
Send a brigade to guard the flank while the 3rd Armored and 67th Infantry attack Stonne. 91st and 5th Demi will attack towards the north at WWII. 7th and 67th will continue north towards La Besace.
Okay, the Germans actually decided to take their first Kampfgruppe, which is the first on the board, and split it down the two sides of the board. So let's go ahead and hear the plan from the German commander, again in AI voice.
We can't let the hills on the western edge fall into French hands. Take your infantry and secure that area. 8th Panzer. Since they start far on the field, I want them to focus on the eastern edge. Take La Besace and roll through towards Stonne. My intention is to send the 2 kg to exploit the more vulnerable side. Ideally, we can draw the French into Stonne and possibly Besace and then hit them from all sides.
Very good. The 2nd Kampfgruppe, which was the 10th Infantry and the 7th Panzer, were to come in on cycle 3. So the Germans had to get something going with the 1st Kampfgruppe in the first 3 cycles. So what happened was at first contact. You heard the German order where the 8th Panzer was to move through La Besace towards Stonne, and the Grossdeutschland regiment was moving into the woods, and they came into contact. To the west, the Grossdeutschland kind of came in light contact and pulled back a little bit. They were just doing exploratory attacks. The 8th Panzer went all in. Unfortunately, the ground that they went through was open, and they were being fired on from 3 sides. So the 91st Infantry to the south, the 7th Armor to the west, who was in the town, and the 67th Infantry to the north were all firing into a kill sack, and it caused tremendous casualties for the 8th Panzer. So another myth that comes out of the 1940 campaign is that the French really couldn't stop the German tanks. The Germans were unstoppable, and that was actually a myth. Deliberate battle was the French approach to battle at the time, and it was about the coordination of artillery, tanks, and infantry. So they understood combined arms battle. The French were very aware of how to create a defense in depth with anti-tank guns covered by infantry, and you actually saw a version of that in our scenario as the 8th Panzer tried to attack the town. The units were capable, and there were heavy tank and anti-tank weapons available. So it's entirely historical that a German attack, unsupported, into the town would meet with heavy French resistance. The IKS lesson here from this specific action is never attack without support in this game system. So if you take a unit and just attack without artillery, without special order support, you're going to have the same negative effect that the 8th Panzer had in that attack. So what happened was that the 7th Armored Brigade of the French counterattacked. Let's go ahead and hear the orders from the 7th Brigade commander.
Continue the assault on the town. I want the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd companies pushing hard in the south while the rest of the tanks give them supporting fire. Once they're able to begin moving into the town, all 6 companies are to move in together.
Very well. The 7th Brigade, as a result, was able to, after multiple cycles, enter La Besace and essentially wiped out the 8th Panzer. So the 8th Panzer was, as a result of attacking without support, and then the 7th, the 67th, and 91st collaborating in the attack on the Panzers with special orders from the 3rd Armored Brigade commander, ended up clearing La Besace of the 8th Panzer. So that was the end of that unit. So there's another myth that was actually explored by the scenario and validated by the scenario, and that was that the French did not understand maneuver. Deliberate battle was actually an offensive doctrine that completely was designed for coordinated attacks. And the French Char B, which you see a picture of here, was specifically designed for an attack. It had 2 weapons. One was to punch through a heavy defense, and the other was to support infantry. So it was an attack vehicle by design. The shortfall that they had was an aircraft, and the British actually withheld their Spitfires, and they just didn't have the air support. And in fact, in our scenario, the French didn't use any air support the entire scenario. So in a way, it was historically accurate. So the IKS lesson for the World War II DivCom system is your supported attacks are twice as powerful as unsupported. So you saw the 8th Panzer going unsupported and get chewed up pretty badly. The 7th, which was not that much stronger than the 8th, counterattacking using special orders, twice as powerful, was able to push the 8th out of town. So always support your attack. So at this point in the battle, the French start shifting forces because the 3rd Armored Division, or a 3rd Armored Division Commander, sees that there's tanks coming from the south. The 7th and 10th, the 2nd Kampf group of the Germans, have been released, and they begin moving south and make contact with the 5th Armored and the 67th Infantry. So the 3rd Armored Division Commander moves the 5th Armored over to support. Where the scroll is on the map is where the 5th Armored Division Commander specifically sent a message saying, watch the west flank. So he sent that to the other infantry division commander and the army commander. So watch that space there. So at this point you have all the action happening around La Bassas and Stonne, and let's listen to the report of the 67th Infantry Brigade of the French as he engages with the 10th Infantry to his north.
I am in the thick of battle against enemy infantry and armor northeast of Stonne. I have reduced more than 40 tanks to less than 10. I have also repulsed the initial German infantry attack in the woods north of my position.
Now, even though he's gotten the word that the west flank is not secured, let's listen to the decision the 3rd Infantry Division Commander of the French decides to make relative to his headquarters and his artillery.
HQ and artillery is moving from initial position to Le Grand Armoire.
Let's see how that turns out. But first, let's talk about another myth. And that's across the board that French forces were inferior to the German. Everywhere that the French infantry matched up with the German infantry in a stand-up fight, they equaled them or better them. So in our case, the 10th and the 67th slugging it out in the woods, the Germans really had no advantage when it came to foot infantry. Both the French and the German infantry fought on foot. This was 1940, coming out of the Depression. Both sides were shorter vehicles and both fought on foot. So it was very much still an infantry fight on foot, and they were equal. Of course, any armor attack against infantry in the open is bad for infantry. And if you don't think that the French can extract German losses, what you see below our wording there is actually the butcher's bill for the battle. You can see there the German tanks, German infantry, German headquarters all were destroyed in the course of the battle. So this was not as lopsided a fight as history and wonks would have you think. So the IKS lesson here is avoid open ground with infantry. And here's why. The 7th Panzer attacks east and hits the 67th as it begins to withdraw from the woods. So let's go ahead and hear the orders from the 7th Panzer Commander.
1st and 5th Companies will, once out of the soft ground, quickly swing toward La Bassas to hit the rear of any enemies there or deflect any counterattacks launched toward them.
You'll notice in those orders the 7th Panzer Commander had just planned to hit La Bassas and try to come in behind the 7th Armor, and he ran into French infantry in the open, and that actually spelled the end of the 67th, because even though they had some units left in Stonne, it really decimated that formation. So armor against infantry in the open is not good for infantry. So at this point, the 7th Armor of the French then counterattacks west, and they use special orders very effectively. They put smoke in the wood line, and the 10th Infantry is pushing down, and they catch the 10th German Infantry in the open and do tremendous damage to them. So they reverse the situation, where the 7th Panzer attacked the 67th Infantry, the 7th Armor attacked the 10th Infantry. So that open ground north of Stonne became quite an infantry killing ground, unfortunately. At this point, the Grossdeutschland division regiment down the bottom left has pushed forward, and with that 3rd Infantry had decided to go into Le Grand Armoire, they caught them there, and the Grossdeutschland regiment wiped out both the French army and its artillery, and the 3rd Infantry and its artillery, thus wiping out the French artillery. Which brings us to another myth. The French artillery was inferior. But it wasn't actually true, because French artillery was the same artillery that had won the First World War. It was as effective as the German artillery, although somewhat lower in caliber. They had more numerous, they had more units of artillery. The problem in this campaign was that the artillery was often in the wrong position and poorly used. And so, in fact, in this scenario, mirroring our historical outcome, the artillery was overrun, not used very often, and the French artillery didn't play a large role here, much like the historical campaign. So the IKS lesson here is around artillery use. And just a rule of thumb is the artillery should always be firing, and that fire should be observed. So you pass the baton of control of artillery to the lowest level that can use it, so you can take advantage of all that artillery, because it's a wasted asset if you don't. But we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. So what happened at this point? We were in the final cycles. It seesawed back and forth. The French 7th Armor and 7th Panzer scrapped in the north. A recon unit from the 10th Panzer came across the mountain and took out the last of the 3rd Infantry Division's command, captured them in fact. The 67th is gone, the 91st is still in place, but the 5th and 7th Armor still survive. So let's close out the strategic bit of the discussion with the Case Red book. Right? So the myth was that the French were outmatched in 1940. And so there's all the discussion is around how tactically they were outmatched. But really, that was not true. It's that the French hadn't invested enough to recover based on one surprise move through the Ardennes. So they had no time or space to recover, unlike some future campaigns that we're going to work on. Right? So the French planning had counted on a quick reaction from the British and Americans to help. They'd also armed the Belgians, the Polish, and the Czechs, trying to create more of a coalition to try and put weight of numbers on their side. But in fact, in the end, they had to fight the campaign alone. So alone, they didn't have the time or space to really recover. They literally didn't have enough units. The British help was there, but it was spotty. They would pull back. Dunkirk was actually not an outcome of the campaign. It was one of the causes of the campaign, because they removed troops from the continent. The French had invested in colonial and naval arms prior to the war, and that really weakened the amount of upgrades that they had for their air force. Their air force was quite weak, and all that put together was exacerbated by the fact that the Great Depression slowed their ability to invest because they didn't have enough money. So it was really, they didn't have enough material to make up for the fact that they had no time and space. So that's really what happened. It wasn't that they were outmatched tactically or they didn't have the right kind of equipment. They were light in air force, and they just didn't have enough time to react. So at the end of the scenario, the 7th Armor, 5th Armor both survived. The 91st Infantry pulls out. The German 7th Panzer and 10th Infantry are in great shape. They've now taken the objectives, and it is a complete German victory in that they've taken Stonne, which actually is what happened historically. The town changed hands 17 times, and this was an engagement that very much felt like the seesaw effect of the battle from 1940. So IKS lessons learned. Let's go ahead and listen to a discussion that happened virtually online between 3 players around the use of artillery. One is the 10th German Panzer Division Commander, the other is the 10th Recon, and finally the 7th Panzer, as they talk about the way artillery was used. So let's go ahead and listen to this conversation between the 3 that was done virtually on Discord.
In the end, I think centralizing our artillery worked out for the best in light of the comms issues.
7th Panzer had our own artillery fall on us.
I thought you were still pushing toward the red squares, Arty zone, so wanted to pound the area ahead of your arrival.
Probably should have sent some runners back.
For our part as 10th Panzer Recon, we definitely dropped the ball by not relaying the arty grids to the division commander, but I wanted to wait until they were more heavily engaged, so it had more of a suppression effect.
But yeah, lessons learned. Do a comms check at the start of the battle and probably set up a specific fire calls channel if doing a centralized battery again.
So the biggest takeaway from the scenario is the use of artillery. So what that means is that if you're going to use artillery well, you got to make sure that you have to think about your headquarters location. and the communication around how artillery is called. Again, artillery can double the impact of an attack if it's used correctly. So if you're relying on wireline communication in early war scenarios, you have to put your headquarters in a good position to make sure that your artillery is overseen, and you have to maintain that position. So really it's about headquarters selection early in the battle. If you have radio, you have more flexibility, of course. Any unit can call artillery. The headquarters assigns support. So if a regiment at the front line calls artillery and the the division, the brigade have both authorized the artillery to fire on behalf of that regiment, they'll get the support and they'll be able to react quickly and double their combat power. So organizing how artillery is called is a key element of success in this system. At division, there's no reason not to fly air recon missions as much as possible because they're there for your use. The French didn't fly a single one. The Germans made good use of air recon missions. At the brigade, it's about pushing support down every single turn, pushing support down to your regiments because that improves their combat outcome. At the regiment, you're calling for fire, using special orders, and use the terrain. Never let artillery or armor attack infantry in the open. If you have that situation, dig in with anti-tank. Use the terrain to make sure that you're taking the types of units to their best advantage. So I hope that was interesting to you. This was an attempt to bring a little bit of history, a little bit of campaign analysis, as well as looking at the scenario and ways we can be better Kriegsspiel players. I really loved this system and enjoyed this game. I think the gameplay was excellent. I look forward to the next one, and I look forward to you joining us out on the board in the International Kriegsspiel Society World War II DivCom system. We'll see you soon.